Hey everyone, Walter Crosby with Helix Sales Development, your host of Sales and Cigars. So thanks for jumping on the podcast today. I have a guest. His name's Glenn Poulos. He's from he's up in Toronto, Canada, in Mississauga, and we had a great conversation about how a technical guy who was trained as a technical guy got into sales. And it's a unique story because he talks about his first job out of college was in the Arctic Circle, working for the government, right? I mean, so that story is worth sitting here listening to it. But he wrote a book that's got like 57 rules and ideas that he thinks are important in sales. We'll talk about a few of those. You can find his book. The show notes will show that, but glennpoulos.com, and Glenn is with two N's. It's one of those books that you can read a chapter, put it down, come back to it in a couple of weeks, and read another story. It's just like little insights from his career. He had just turned 60 when we recorded this, so it was a fun conversation. So go grab a cocktail, go grab a cigar, strap in, and ready for another episode of Sales and Cigars. Thanks. So, Glenn, I want to thank you for taking the time to jump on the program with us, taking time out of your schedule. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Walter.
So, when I meet somebody like you, I have a question, because you have a technical background and you have a technical company. So I'm always curious about that little crossover, right? Sometimes it's a deep and wide river, and sometimes it's shallow and easy to get across, but I suspect that you had an easy time with it. So could we talk a little bit about your background, and then then how you stepped into sales, because I think those are always interesting stories.
For sure. Thank you. That's a great question. So I went to school for electronic engineering technology, and I got a diploma. I went to DeVry Institute in Canada. It's a big school. It's all over North America. Mm-hmm. I loved the program. I loved technology. I think our computers we were using were like Apple IIe's in the program, but playing with transistors and at the circuit board level and learning basic programming as well. It was just like died and went to heaven, right? And so I got recruited while I was in college by the Canadian government, the Weather Service, to go and be a combination weather technician / electronic technician. They wanted to save money up in the Arctic, and they wanted to send weather techs up who are trained in electronics, so they didn't have to hire an electronic technician to sit up there and do nothing, right? So they sent me to school for 9 months after college to learn the weather stuff, and then they shipped me off to the Arctic. I lived on a weather station.
Okay, wait, hold on. I always think these are interesting conversations, but I've never heard somebody have to go to the Arctic Circle for their first gig out of college.
Yeah.
This is awesome. I like where this is going.
Yeah, so there were 5 of us. We were on a weather station. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen John Carpenter's The Thing. I mean, It was very similar to that. Not as big. We didn't have a helicopter, but it had a similar. No, well, we had polar bears, but the local Inuit. They would take care of dispatching them, and so there's lots of wildlife, and you had to be cognizant of that while you were up there. It was definitely, we're up on the tundra, and at 72 degrees north latitude, so quite high, and so I hated it, and I did not want to be living up there with 4 other guys, for a year, complete isolation, flown in, flown out, that kind of thing. It wasn't like 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. It was like you're there, right? And
for the whole year.
For the whole year, yeah. And
until somebody brought you supplies, you didn't have anybody else.
So they airdrop supplies on a regular basis, and then the barge came in once a year when the ice melted and dropped off a ginormous supply of stuff. at the in the bay, and we would all go down and we would load up, take multiple trips, and we would load it up with a year's worth of soda and like chips and pop and all sorts of non-perishables. But they would fly in non-perishable items like food and things like that, meat and fruit and stuff periodically as well. There was a landing strip, and they would drop that off. They'd drop off mail too. Mm-hmm. And so I was an electronic / met tech, meteorological technician. And coincidentally, like right when a year in, right when I was, kind of going stir crazy, the officer in charge came and knocked on my door and said, "Hey, there's a job doing some electronic work down at headquarters in Toronto. Would you like to?" And I'm like, "When do I leave?" Get me out of here, right?
Today.
Yeah, exactly. So got on a plane, and of course I live in Toronto, right? So at the time, and I still do, and in the Toronto area, and so I was working in the fixing electronic gadgets in the basement of Environment Canada. These were laser ceilometers, checking cloud heights using lasers. It was new technology. It was very cool. And I actually got to travel around calibrating and fixing these things at all the major airports. It was pretty cool, and I liked it. And my coworkers, we were in one of the Canadian unions for government workers. I don't remember the name of it anymore. And I was an electronic technician. My coworkers kept saying, you work too fast, dude. And and like you got to slow down, right? You're fixing too many things too quickly,
making
or whatever.
Us look bad.
And so one day the boss guy, who was ex DND, so in the US that's DOD, but in Canada we call it DND, Department of National Defense.
Yep.
And he was such a bright guy, and he was the manager of the whole group. And he came to me, he said, "Glenn," he said, "I want to tell you something." He said, "Money doesn't flow out of a toolbox. It flows out of a pen," right? And I didn't really understand it. I was 20 something, early 20s, and I'm like, what? And he's like, he said, you should go get a job in sales or something like that. You don't belong working here, in the quality assurance department of the federal government, And so
you recognize something, right?
He did. I mean, he never told me what it was, but he said, "Go get a job in sales." And so I just immediately flipped to technical sales in the paper and started looking for jobs. And I learned the title technical sales rep. It's a very common term. There's millions of them in North America. Sure. And I started applying for those jobs, and I ended up getting an interview with this company. And I went for the interview, and then, the next day I called the guy back and I said, "Hey, did I get the job?" And then he stopped taking my calls, but I still called twice a day. Right. And I spoke to the lady, I think her name was Teresa, and I said, "Hey, Teresa," and the guy's name was Kim. Right. And I said, "Hey, Kim, or Teresa, did I get the job? Has he made a decision yet, or whatever?" Right. And so 10 days later, I'd already made 20 phone calls to this guy. Right. Finally, He calls me back and he says, "We're flying you to Montreal to meet my partners." And so that's fine. I was quite impressed by all that. I was used to driving around in this crappy Chevy Chevette or whatever, this government car with roll down windows and no radio and a barely functioning heater, no AC. And the guy's partner in Quebec picks me up at the airport at Montreal in a BMW 750, right? And I'm like, holy shit. And I mean, I was duly impressed by this. This guy was driving the 750, right? And he pulls into the parking lot, and there were 3 partners in Montreal, 1 in Toronto, and there were 2 other 750s in the parking lot, and they had the license plates were 1 digit apart. So they'd basically gone and gotten themselves 3 matching 750s, right? I'm like, okay, sure. I'm definitely going into sales. And so the interview went very well. And then, I went back to Toronto, and the guy hired me or whatever. And early on, he said, we had no intention of hiring you. You had 0 experience. We were looking for a guy with experience, 3 to 5 years. And I said, "Well, why'd you hire me then?" Right. And he said, "Well, because you're the only guy that followed up 20 times. And I said, "And if you're going to do that much on the job, you'll do that much on the job, right? To get the job, you'll do that much on the job." Right. And so, my very first lesson was the lesson of,
persistence,
following up and persistence. Right. And Yeah,
Well,
so that's how I made the jump from technology, and it was a very technical. We were selling high end electronic instruments, and so it was state of the art stuff we were selling. It was really cool stuff.
so you it was a natural because somebody, I mean, the guy from the D&D recognized something. It would have been curious to figure out what he saw, but yeah, you have to be able to communicate in sales. So he must have just saw how you operated and that you were technically savvy and like put that to use and go
Yeah,
make yourself some money. So
yeah.
uh, when you're, how did you go from knowing the difference between a resistor and a transistor, and then knowing the difference between a prospect and a suspect, right?
Right.
Let's talk like, how, did you get training? Did you just do it all on the job? Did the guys with the BMWs give you give you a tip? How did you get, how did you take that leap?
Well, so they basically sort of we were a distributor, so we were selling other companies' products from around the world. I was in Canada, so I was the Toronto area technical sales rep for these 30 or 40 vendors, right? And so, and of course, I had used oscilloscopes and other products at the government, and so I was basically familiar with it, but I was kind of like a deer in the headlights, not knowing much of anything, right? Like they had a vast array of instruments to sell, and it's like selling an entire orchestra when all you've ever learned was the guitar or whatever, right? So there's a lot to learn, right? And
Sure.
so they sat me in the back office and gave me a bunch of data sheets and said go to town or whatever, but and I did my best, and then they started handing me bingo leads and things like that. But
Bingo
the
leads.
bingo leads are, so in the old days they would get magazines, and in the magazines was these pack of cards, and that people would fill out. They wanted literature on your products in the 80s and
Ah,
90s, and we
gotcha.
called them bingo leads, right? And
Got it.
so I'd get a lot of the bingo leads, and I'd call them up, and you know and a lot of these a lot of those lessons I learned in the early days, they still hold true to me now, which is, you got to have to get in front of the customer, right? It's not, one, you get them on the phone, find out if you can get in front of them for any reason, and then this is where my rules started coming into play, right? So, because I had all these products to learn, and that's where I came up with my saying in the book called GBL, greed based learning, right? And
Well, let's go there because the book's intriguing to me. I love the title. There's a series of rules. So like let kind of like weave that into your story. That's a
sure.
good segue. Thank you.
Yeah, so the first, the first one I just touched on a second ago was one about, there's all these instruments, you don't know anything about them, and how in the world are you going to learn them, right? And I learned an interesting concept, which I coined a phrase called greed-based learning, trademark, pending, right? No, I'm just kidding, but the but everybody at work here, they all just use the GBL, and which means that, and I always, the fastest way is analogy to explain it, which is, I'm not a car guy, right? I don't really know anything about cars. I mean, I like the car that I drive right now, but when every 4 years when I get a new car, I figure out the kind of sort of cars that I'm interested in, and whatever range or level. And all of a sudden, for that few weeks, I become a car expert, right? And I'm able to take in things about motors and transmissions, suspensions, paint, this and that, which I would never in a million years be able to retain or otherwise care about. And it takes zero effort, right? And the reason why is because I'm greedy at that moment in time for getting myself the best car. And so I'm able to, without any energy at all, using what I call greed-based learning, where there's something in it for me, apply and learn the things that are important to me. So I use the same approach with the instruments. And I would call the factories and I would say, hey, I got a demo tomorrow. I don't really know anything about this. Give me the top 5 things that this guy might care about, and give me a crash course. And because I knew that, it was a $40,000 instrument, $80,000 instrument, and my commission was X, Y, or Z dollars, I was able to equate getting paid with remembering, and it was like never took any effort, right? And if I tried to remember it 2 weeks before when I had no customer, no opportunity, and no opportunity for
You
commission,
wouldn't have got
I wouldn't have
it, right?
got it, right? And so,
It's interesting GBL because I've thought about that from salespeople will learn, whether it's process or technique or whatever, when it matters. And you just coined a phrase where that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like you're gonna dive in and get it and hold it to because there's a possible outcome there.
Yeah,
Okay, I got
exactly.
it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So so then I learned a few rules that came by in quick succession, and they kind of come off very quickly at the beginning of the book. And the title of the book is "Never Sit in the Lobby," and that's not really the first rule, but I'll start with that one. So never sit in the lobby. A lot of guys say to me, "Well, what am I supposed to do? Wait in my car?" And I'm like, "No, dude, you're supposed to stand in the lobby.
Right.
Show up in the lobby, but don't be too early and don't be late, right? And don't sit down. Don't be playing on your phone. Don't be staring out the window. Stand at attention, go in, right? And be waiting for your customer to walk out, right? And that's where, and I found that, also, especially if people are a lot taller than you, I'm not a super tall guy, right? Sitting down made it even worse, right? The guy's towering over me. Then I have to rise up to him to shake his hand. It's just not a good look, right?
You're not organized. You're not prepared. You don't look professional. You look weak.
Exactly.
And you might learn something walking around the lobby. They might have something cool on the wall. You could read it, start the conversation. I love it.
Yeah.
That's great.
And so, and the other thing, the golden rule, which all my people here know, and I've all recanted thousands of times over the years, is always show up with something in your hand and something in your mind. Right. And so there's a big to-do in the book about delivering quotes, but essentially sometimes maybe it's a folder with a quote in it. Maybe it's the data sheet. Maybe it's a new catalog. Maybe it's a promo item that we're giving away. I know the guy I'm dropping off a promo item, a coffee mug, a thermos, something, everybody gives away promo items. That's the something in my hand. And I always have something in my mind. I wanted to talk to you about that new thing, and we wanted to upgrade your system. We have a new box coming out, whatever. Always something in my mind, something in my hand. Right. And then
that's a dual approach. I like it. That's good.
Yeah. And so I'm never stuck for, there's no pregnant pause at the beginning. Right. I've got something to hand to the guy, shake his hand. I'm standing up. I'm not distracted, and I can get right into it, not waste this time. Then the rule that sort of precedes not sitting in the lobby is the rule called the Callbook factor. Right. And that's where, and this is assuming, you go back to these companies over and over again and you meet other people. And in the old days, we used to use a call book. Now I use my phone and my CRM, but it's the same concept. What I would do is obviously I would write down everyone's name. But when I would meet a guy, I would say, like, "Hey, Walter, nice to meet you, Walter." And then in my mind, I would go, "Walter, Walter, Walter." And I would remember the face and the name, right? And then I would write it down as soon as I could in the book. And there were times where I would even write down distinguishing features if I needed to. And then before I came the next time, I would open up my call book or my phone or my laptop, whatever it was, whatever the technology of that decade was. And I would scan through each person's name and remember their face. Right, because I have a great memory. It's just really, really short, and it's down there in the RAM, but the seek time is very slow. Right, so I know the name, but I can't bring it out real quick. So I would remember it in the parking lot instead. Right, and so the Callbook factor states remember them all before you get in the lobby. So that when because one of the other rules is always ask the guy for a mini tour. Not a tour, but a mini tour. Like he's got a new lab or he's got a new building or you're just meeting the guy. And I always say, "Hey, do you think I could get like a mini tour of your new production lab? Could I get a mini tour of your new engineering department, of your production area, whatever? I'd really like to see what's going, see if we can match up." And usually when you say mini tour, they don't, if you say tour, they think they need to hire a tour guide, get a bus, serve you refreshments. It's a mini tour.
A lot of time. Got
right.
It. That's
and
cool.
If they hesitate, I say, "Look, I promise while we're in the building, I won't sell anyone any encyclopedias." And, they usually laugh. They're like, "Okay, fine. Come on. We'll give you a quick tour." Right. And that's where I see all my competitors' stuff on the shelves. And, I can figure out so many things that I couldn't have figured out otherwise. Right.
Yeah. You're looking behind the curtain and you can see what they have, what they're using, what they're not using, how they're set up. Right. And sometimes in those situations, you get to ask questions about something and even engage with somebody else that might be in the lab. You're expanding your connection within the organization.
Yeah. And so going back to the Callbook factor, as he's giving me my mini tour, he may just be meeting me the first time, or maybe he knows me and he's just giving me another mini tour. But there's people walking down the hallways, right? And I'm like, hey, Bob, because I remember Bob instantly now because I already recalled his face and name in the car, right? And Bob, he goes by me. He's like, who was that again? Because I could tell he didn't quite remember me because he didn't get the Callbook factor that day, right?
He didn't have that written down.
Sure. And then later he remembers, oh, yeah, that's Glenn. Wow, he remembered me, right? And, it's so nice to be remembered. And then it's Sally and da-da-da. And, oh, yeah, whatever. I heard you just had a baby. That's some great news. That kind of thing, right? And the guy beside me is going, wow, this guy knows frickin' everyone, right? Mm-hmm. And the worst thing is when you don't practice the Callbook factor and Bob says hi to you and you can't remember his name. You know it, but you're already like 2 doors down before and it's the opportunity's lost.
And you're in the hallway and there's no context. You can't see anything in the office.
Exactly.
Name on the door. I've never heard somebody talk about a Callbook like that where you practice the recall and you look at it for everybody in the organization. That's just something you come up with, you develop for yourself to help you solve a problem.
Well, basically, I learned that from one of my boss, one of the guys that drove the 750, right? And he saw me forget a face later, and then later when we left, we were discombobulating the meeting or whatever, and he went by and he said, this is a trick I remembered, is remember their name before you need it, right? And just scan the book quickly, remember the faces, and then enter, right? And so
that's a cool trick, and it's having something that you can, whatever the media is, like now you can put somebody's picture in a CRM,
right?
But you might have it on your phone. But that's still a cool. The practice though is what's interesting, that you recall it before you go in, because I struggle with the same thing.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
I have a rule with my wife. If we're at a party or a function,
make sure you say everyone's name.
I introduce you and I don't say their name.
Yeah. That's
your responsibility now.
I do the same thing with my wife. Yeah. I'm like, honey, make sure that you use their name. Yeah, exactly. Because I don't have a call book for the soccer tournament, or whatever. Right.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But you can apply that in business with, if you're sales manager or leading, right, you can say, have your rep do the same thing, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm rude. I didn't make the introduction.
Right.
So that's a little trick. I love that though. That's great. So the book is like a list of these kind of cool
so it's,
ideas that people can.
So it's 57 sort of factors. Some of the other factors, and a lot of them are named after people. Like an example, I would say with like the Tony factor. The thing is a lot of times when there's a name associated with the factor, it's not something endearing. So I changed the names to protect the guilty. So, because not every rule is something you want to repeat, right? Some of the rules are ones you don't want to repeat, right? And so, so there's a bunch of stories. There's a few mistakes that I made in my career. I built up 2 businesses and sold them both, I learned a lot in that. And, so I pass on a lot of lessons about that. I also just pass on a lot of lessons about being a pleasure to do business with and being a good person. Right. And so I talk a lot about empathy and active listening in the book, and I actually go on a little bit, sort of, I don't want to say ad nauseum, but I go on at length about those sort of concepts because I don't want them to be lost on people like it's some sort of like cliche, like, oh yeah, be empathic, right? Because most people don't, they suck at empathy, right? And
most people do, because they don't really understand what it means and how it presents. So let me run this idea past you. I'd be curious to your take. I always make the similarity, like if you got a buddy and you guys are good friends and you just known each other really well, and that person calls you up and says, hey, I got something I need to talk to you about. I need some guidance. I need some help, or I need to talk to you. You're going to approach that conversation over a beer, and where you're kind of going to lean in, you're going to listen, and you're going to approach it as this guy's asked for help, so I'm not going to be an ass here. I'm really going to be empathetic about listening to him, acknowledging the struggle. You're not going to be an asshole about that. So that's sort of like how we should approach sales. Like, listen carefully, ask a lot of questions, clarify. Now, the one difference is sometimes when we're with our buddy, we can tell him he's an idiot for thinking something, right? But that's only after you've acted like you really dug into the problem. Is that how you would describe empathy, or would you put a different spin on it?
So the way I sort of explain it to people is and I also couple it very tightly with my concept of active listening, but I also explain that there's empathy, sympathy, and compassion, right? So sympathy means that you can understand what the person is feeling, right? And so, he has a toothache. Oh, I can understand what, right. So compassion is willing to relieve the person's suffering. Okay. And so, yeah, exactly. Or let them go to the dentist and get their tooth fixed, or whatever. Whatever the problem is, you're willing to help relieve the suffering, right? But empathy is actually feeling what the other person is feeling. It requires you to take a pause in time and put yourself in the other person's shoes, which means that you have to exit your own shoes, right? So you have to remove your biases and judgments, right? And so it doesn't take long for you to figure out that oftentimes you're not truly being empathic because you're kind of like listening, hearing, and understanding. You're sympathetic and compassionate about it, but you're still judging them, right? And so, right. The guy maybe he, cracked up his car or something like that or whatever, but, he also doesn't have a job right now and, he's been through a nasty divorce or whatever. And, people often are like, oh, maybe you should watch where you were going or whatever, or, that really sucks or whatever. But stop and imagine, what would it be like? I don't have a wife, I don't have a job, and now I don't have a car. Like, what does that feel like, right? Not, oh, I just picked up my new car and I'm feeling bad for a guy. And once you actually do that, then you can respond in a more appropriate way. You're not going to buy him a new car or anything like that. Compassion might be driving him somewhere.
But you put yourself in a position where you can feel
what he's feeling.
They're feeling.
Exactly.
And because you've listened carefully and you've just removed yourself from where you are that's a better definition. I like that. It really, I think that would be helpful to when I'm coaching salespeople about that. I might steal that, Glenn.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. There's a long chapter on it in the book. Yeah.
Where do people find the book?
So GlennPoulos.com. So 2 N's in Glenn, and it's POULOS.com. And that links to all the Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all that stuff, chapters in Canada, etc. And it's available in all the different formats.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I think it's one of those. It sounds to me like one of the books that somebody can sit at their table in their office or sit next to their nightstand and pick it up and read a chapter and then just get it. You don't have to sit down and consume the whole thing, right? It's something
you can grab it all in snippets. You could take you can read it as fast or as slow as you want, and each chapter, each little concept stands by itself. You can flip it around at will, and you're always learning something interesting and new or problems to avoid.
57 stories, if you will.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I like to kind of Sales and Cigars. I kind of like to end these conversations around cigars and a relation. What might your relationship be, if any, with cigars?
Well, so I was a very avid smoker, and of all things tobacco related, and I did give it up 10 years ago. I celebrated my 60th birthday a few days ago, and I celebrated on the eve of my 50th birthday. I had quit smoking, but prior to that, I had found that I used to love smoking cigars, and when I was smoking cigarettes at the same time, I was able to have a very symbiotic relationship with the two. But when I would quit smoking, like the wife would say, hey, you got to quit smoking or whatever, then I'm like, okay, well, I'll only smoke cigars. But
I'll back up to my cigars. Sure.
being the fiend that I am, I would end up, like trying to sneak in a little inhaling of them and, forget the purpose of, swilling it around and just enjoying it. Right. So I really haven't had one in a little while, but I used to be, I used to love them dearly, and it used to be.
Was there a go-to cigar that you had, or?
Yeah, so it's been a while, but of course in Canada we're quite readily accessed to the Cohibas, and there's some nice cigar stores I live in Oakville, Ontario, and there's some good selection down on the lakeshore, and so that was usually a go-to, and.
Was it an outside activity or an inside activity for you?
Well, back in the day, I'll admit that I smoked inside, and much to the the dislike of many others. But the cigars, a lot of times I would go outside for it. But I'm not going to say that I don't smoke cigars inside too. Like when I smoked, I pretty much smoked everywhere, right? And
well, but back years ago. Like if you watch, shows like Mad Men or any of those shows even movies from the 50s and 60s, people smoked everywhere, elevators, offices, and cigars were part of that. My wife even, she was a partner in a CPA firm back east, and the partner that she worked with as she was, growing up in the firm, she would have meetings with him, and he'd be smoking a cigar.
Yeah.
Right. And she's not a big fan of cigar smoke. But she sat there when he would smoke, because it was his office and he was a partner, so she didn't have a lot of choices.
Exactly.
But it was a much more common thing not that long ago.
No, you're right. Yeah.
I remember people smoking on airplanes, and then they got relegated to the back of the airplane.
I remember
and
that.
And then you got relegated to a certain part of the airport, and then none of that. And it's like, you're a pariah. I have there's a tagline from Punch Cigars that, the Punch character, there's a quote in one of the magazine advertisements that, it's an idiot repellent. And, most people like either are drawn to it or repelled. And for me, it works. I try to be respectful if I'm out, like in a park or something, walking through a trail. Because I know people don't necessarily care for it. But I'll tell you this quick story. I was on a tee waiting for the group in front of us. I'm smoking a cigar, and this lady and her husband pull up in a cart, and they're, back from the tee. And she gets up out of her cart and walks over to the tee, and she says, "Excuse me." And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, your cigar is bothering me.
Oh, man.
And I'm like, well, that seems fair. Well, why is that fair? And I'm like, well, because you're bothering me.
Yeah.
And by this time, her husband had come around, and it's like, honey, come back to the car, leave the man alone, right? But she expected me to put out the cigar, and we're outside.
Yeah, no, that's.
And I'm like 100 yards away from her. No. So, and I was in the woods most of the time anyway, so I don't know how it bothered her.
There's probably a lot of other things that bother her. They have names for people like that now.
So we'll leave it there, so we don't get ourselves in trouble.
Right on.
Thank you very much. It's like some great stories. People can find the book on Glenn with 2 N's Poulos.com. I really appreciate it. Great stories.
Thanks for having me, Walter. It was really great. Really nice thank you.
Thank you for listening to Sales and Cigars with Walter Crosby of Helix Sales Development. For more on sales and cigars, remember to like, share, and subscribe. Sales and Cigars, produced by thepodcastproshop.com.